Welcome to Spot Podcast, the voice of scientists, where groundbreaking research meets your ears. We bring you the world's top-cited research articles in an engaging podcast format, making cutting-edge science accessible anytime, anywhere. Stay informed, stay inspired. This is the Spot Podcast, the voice of scientists.
Remember all those water shortages we talked about?
Yeah.
Seems like those headlines were just, scratching the surface when it comes to the future of our water. And to get the full picture, we really need to look up, way up actually, to the mountains.
It's true. Mountains, they're not just these beautiful landscapes. They have a vital role, They act as these world's water towers. You could say they're like natural reservoirs, storing and releasing water for billions of people downstream.
Okay, so water towers. I'm into the image, but what actually makes a mountain earn a title like that?
Well, it's not just any mountain with some, snow on top.
Right.
These specific mountains, they receive much more precipitation compared to, say, the surrounding lowlands. It's because of something called orographic precipitation.
Yep.
Basically what happens is moist air will hit the mountain and it gets forced upwards, cools down, and then, bam, rain and snow.
So more rain and snow equals more water. Makes sense. But what about storage? How do these mountains, how do they work as reservoirs?
That's where the whole cryospheric thing comes in. These water towers have significant amounts of snow and ice, and they act like these giant natural storage tanks, right?
Okay.
So that snow and ice will melt gradually, throughout the year, and it gives this steady flow of water downstream, even when it's dry season.
So it's not just immediate rainfall. It's about long-term storage and release of the water. That's fascinating. But there are so many mountains all over the world. So how do we even begin to understand which ones are the most important ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's where this groundbreaking research from Nature, this is where it comes in. They created the first ever global index, and it ranks the importance of these water towers and, what's crucial, their vulnerability.
That's what really caught my eye, the vulnerability aspect. It's not just identifying the water sources, but understanding how, at risk they are.
Exactly. This index, it's not just, some academic exercise. What it does is it helps us pinpoint which of these water towers are the most critical for both humans and ecosystems, and which ones are facing the greatest threats from climate change, growing populations, and other pressures.
Okay, so this index, how does it actually work? Like, how do you rank a mountain's importance as a water tower?
They combine two main factors. One is the supply index. This measures how much water a mountain range can store and release.
Okay.
And the other is the demand index. That one looks at how much the downstream population and ecosystems depend on that water.
It's like supply and demand, but for water.
Yeah.
So a mountain might have tons of water locked up, in the snow and ice, but if no one downstream actually needs it, it's not as important as a water tower.
That's a great way to put it. And using this method, they've identified 78 water tower units, or WTUs, globally. And here's the big thing. Over 1.6 billion people, that's like almost a quarter of the entire world's population, they live in areas that depend on these WTUs. We're talking about a huge chunk of humanity directly affected by, what happens in these mountain regions.
That's a staggering number. So let's unpack this index a bit further. What exactly goes into the supply index? How do they measure a mountain's ability to provide water?
Well, the supply index looks at four main factors: precipitation, snow cover, glaciers, and surface water storage, which includes things like lakes and reservoirs. It's essentially all the different ways water can be collected and stored in these mountain environments.
So it's not just one thing. It's a combination of factors that gives a water tower its supply power.
Right.
Are there any examples that really stand out in terms of their supply capabilities?
Definitely. There's the Indus WTU in Asia. It's kind of, you could say, an all-rounder. It's got a good balance of all four factors, which makes it a vital source of water for that, heavily populated region.
And then there's Iceland, right? Known for its incredible glaciers.
Exactly. Iceland's glacier ice storage is astonishing, like 15 times greater than its annual precipitation. Just imagine enough ice to bury the entire country under a sheet thicker than, like, a skyscraper.
Wow, that's a powerful image. And then we have the Andes in South America, right?
Yeah.
They must score high on both precipitation and glaciers.
You got it. The Andes are a powerhouse, really. A prime example of how high precipitation and massive glacial reserves can combine to create, a vital water source. And it's not just about temperate or tropical regions either. This research also highlighted the Northwest Territories and Nunavut in Canada.
Oh, interesting. What makes those water towers unique?
Well, their supply comes mostly from glaciers, snow, and surface water. But the thing is, the region actually gets surprisingly low precipitation compared to the overall basin.
So different ingredients, different recipes, but all contributing to the same essential function, supplying water to sustain life downstream.
Exactly. And it brings us to, I think, a crucial point. The importance of a water tower isn't just about how much water it actually has.
Right.
It's about how well it can meet the needs of the people and ecosystems downstream.
Which brings us to the demand index. Let's dive into how they assess, the other half of this equation.
All right, so the demand index, it takes a holistic view. It considers human needs like irrigation, industry, domestic use, but also the water needed for healthy ecosystems. Rivers, lakes, wetlands, all relying on the water flowing from these mountains.
So it's not just about how much water we're taking out, it's also about how much the natural environment needs to thrive. It sounds like they're painting a much bigger picture here.
They are. And looking across continents, you see some interesting differences. Take Asia, for example. Basins like the Indus, Amu Darya, and Ganges-Brahmaputra, they're incredibly densely populated and rely heavily on irrigation. So their demand for that mountain water it's enormous.
Yeah, more people, more farms, more thirst. Makes sense. But what about Europe? Is it a similar situation there?
In Europe, things are a bit different. The Volga and Ural basins in Russia, they stand out, not necessarily because of huge populations, but because of the exceptionally high natural water demand.
Great.
These water towers, they're essential for keeping vast forests, wetlands, and the biodiversity healthy.
So it's a reminder that these water towers, they're not just for us, they're for supporting entire ecosystems.
Yeah.
And then there's North America, which I'm guessing is a mix of everything.
Exactly. You've got basins like the Mississippi, Missouri, this huge network of rivers and wetlands that drives high natural water demand. And then you've got places like California where the demand comes from agriculture, industry, growing cities, and of course the environment. It's a real balancing act.
So just like the supply index, the demand index highlights how different water towers face these unique pressures. But ultimately, a water tower's importance comes down to how well its supply can meet the demand, whether it's from people or the natural world.
Exactly. It's about that, delicate balance between supply and demand. And this research, it's actually identified the most critical water tower globally based on this balance.
Okay, I have to ask, which one is it?
It's the Upper Indus Basin. Not really a surprise given its abundant water resources and the huge, downstream population.
But the research didn't stop at just ranking importance, did it? They also looked at the vulnerability of these water towers. What did they find?
That's where things get, concerning. Many of the most important water towers, including the Indus, they're also the most vulnerable. They face this convergence of factors that could really disrupt that critical balance between supply and demand.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Let's unpack what makes these water towers so vulnerable.
Yeah, it's a real concern. Like if you imagine a system under immense strain, that's kind of what many of these water towers are up against.
So let's break down these factors a bit. What exactly is putting these water towers at risk?
It's a complex kind of web, Think political tensions, especially when rivers cross international borders.
Yeah.
You've also got existing water stress, where demand is already kind of pushing those limits of supply. And then there's also the question of how effective governments are, in managing those resources sustainably.
So it's not just about the water itself. It's about how we manage or mismanage this precious resource. But of course, we can't forget, the elephant in the room, climate change.
Absolutely. The research factored in those projected climate changes, rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns. And they also looked at things like population and economic growth, which often put even more pressure on water resources.
Right. More people generally equals more demand for water, especially as economies grow. So they've got this really comprehensive view of vulnerability, taking into account all these, interacting forces. Let's bring it back to the Indus. What makes it so vulnerable?
The Indus it's a prime example of how these factors can kind of combine to create, a perfect storm. It's a transboundary basin, meaning its water flows through multiple countries, Pakistan, India, China, Afghanistan. That alone can create, potential tension as each country has its own needs and priorities.
Right. I mean, water is essential. And when you've got multiple countries depending on the same source, things can get complicated fast.
Exactly. And on top of that, the Indus Basin already faces high water stress, meaning demand is, pushing those limits of what's available. And to make things worse, the population is projected to increase, get this, by 50% by 2050, coupled with an economy projected to grow almost eightfold. That's a recipe for even greater water demand.
A 50% population increase. That's a huge surge of people needing water for everything, from drinking to sanitation to growing food.
Yeah.
It's almost hard to grasp, the scale.
Yeah, it is. And then you add climate change on top of that, rising temperatures and those, potentially altered precipitation patterns. It could mean less predictable water availability from snow and glacier melt.
Yeah.
And that's a massive problem when you've got such a large and growing population that depends on it.
So the Indus is facing pressure from all sides: political tensions, existing water stress, a population boom, surging economy, and the wild card of climate change. It's a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah, it's a stark warning sign. The Indus is a lifeline for millions, but its future is, undeniably uncertain. And sadly, it's not alone. The research shows many other, vital Asian WTUs are facing similar pressures.
It's like a domino effect, isn't it? If one water tower starts to fail, the consequences could ripple throughout the entire region. Are other continents seeing similar levels of vulnerability?
It is a global issue. And the research highlighted that while the most vulnerable water towers are mostly concentrated in Asia, other continents are also dealing with these challenges. South America, for example, generally has a lower vulnerability compared to Asia, but there's still a lot of variation.
So can you give us some examples of how those vulnerabilities, play out in different parts of the world?
Sure. In South America, you've got the water tower supplying northern Chile's Pacific coast. And it's facing this double whammy of existing water stress and projections for, well, declining precipitation due to climate change.
So they're already struggling with scarcity and now facing the possibility of even less rainfall. That's a worrying combination.
It is.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Lipuna region. The main concern there is rapid population and economic growth. That growth puts increasing pressure on the water tower to, keep up with that demand.
So a different challenge, but with potentially, serious consequences. What about North America? How are our water towers holding up?
Well, in North America, the vulnerabilities are mainly linked to population growth, which drives up demand, and rising temperatures, which affects, snowmelt and overall water availability. It's a good reminder that these challenges are playing out right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, it really highlights that this is a global issue with very local impacts.
Okay, so we've established that these water towers are incredibly important globally, but also, incredibly vulnerable. So why should we care? Why should this matter to someone who, doesn't live near a mountain range?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because it's easy to think of this as like a distant problem. But the thing is, what happens in those mountains, it affects us all. It's about realizing that those seemingly remote mountain regions, they're intricately connected to our lives.
Yeah, let's make that connection. Why should people care about what's happening to these water towers? Well, think about planetary boundaries, those safe operating limits for our planet. Water is one of those key boundaries, and we're already pushing them in many parts of the world. And the degradation of those water towers, well, it could have devastating consequences for billions.
So it's not just about the mountains themselves, it's about the entire planet's, water cycle getting thrown off balance.
Exactly. These mountains are essential for global freshwater use. They impact billions of people who need water for drinking, sanitation, growing food. They're also biodiversity hotspots, home to these unique ecosystems and species that could be lost if those water towers are disrupted.
I never really thought about it that way. So the food we eat, it's actually connected to the health of these mountain ecosystems.
It absolutely is. And we can't forget about energy either. Mountain water is often used for hydropower, which is a major source of renewable energy around the world. So the decline of those water towers could even impact, our transition to a cleaner energy future.
Wow. It really is all connected, isn't it? It's not just about mountains, it's about water, biodiversity, food, energy, all these essential systems that keep our planet running.
Precisely. The key takeaway here is that we're all part of this interconnected web. What happens in those seemingly, remote mountain regions, it has ripple effects that can be felt around the world.
So it's not just about protecting those places for their own sake. It's about protecting them for our own well-being and the future of the planet. But it's easy to get overwhelmed by all the doom and gloom. So is there hope? Can we do anything to protect these vital resources?
There is. While some changes are already happening and might be irreversible, our actions can still make a huge difference. It's not a lost cause. We can turn things around, but it needs, a real concerted effort from individuals, communities, governments, and organizations worldwide.
Okay, that's encouraging to hear. So what can we actually do? What are some of the most, promising strategies for safeguarding these water towers? Okay, so let's get into some solutions here. I'm all ears. What can we do to protect these vital water towers?
Well, I mean, there's no magic bullet, unfortunately.
Oh,
Each water tower faces, unique challenges, so solutions need to be kind of tailored to those specific contexts. But there are definitely some promising, approaches out there.
oh, let's hear them.
Oh.
I'm curious to know what's working and where we can, really make a difference.
One really promising area is focusing on what we call nature-based solutions. It's about working with nature, not against it, to restore and protect these mountain ecosystems.
Okay, nature-based solutions. I like the sound of that. What does that actually, look like in practice?
Well, think, restoring those degraded forests, the wetlands, things like that can help improve water retention, reduce erosion, and make those ecosystems more resilient to climate change. It's about recognizing that, healthy ecosystems are the foundation of healthy water towers.
It makes sense. If the mountains are like giant sponges, we need to keep those sponges, healthy and functioning properly.
Yeah.
So what other strategies are showing promise?
Promoting sustainable agricultural practices is key. Things like, using water-efficient irrigation techniques and reducing the use of pesticides and fertilizers, which can pollute water sources.
Right.
Less pollution, it means cleaner water downstream, for everyone.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that what we do, even far away from the mountains, can directly impact those water sources. But what about the political challenges? How do we get countries to cooperate, especially when water is such a precious and often contested resource?
Yeah, that's where things get really tricky. But there is some encouraging examples of transboundary water agreements that have helped foster cooperation and avoided conflicts.
Give us some hope. Are there any agreements that have actually worked in practice?
One of the most successful examples is the Indus Waters Treaty between India and Pakistan. Signed back in 1960, it's helped those two countries, even with their often strained relationship, avoid major water conflicts.
Wow. So even in the face of those geopolitical tensions, cooperation over water is possible. That's really inspiring.
It is, and no treaty is perfect, of course, and there are ongoing challenges, but the Indus Waters Treaty shows us that cooperation, it is possible, even in these complex and politically sensitive situations.
It's about, finding common ground and realizing that everyone benefits from shared resources being managed sustainably. But what about the role of technology? Can innovation help us address, some of these water challenges?
Absolutely. Technology, it can play a huge role in improving water management and reducing our impact on water towers.
Yeah, okay. I'm all ears. What are some examples of, technologies that are making a real difference?
One area that's really exciting is advancements in remote sensing and data analytics. We've got these satellites and drones that can monitor water resources in real time, giving us, really valuable data about snowpack levels, glacier melt, water availability.
So it's like having eyes in the sky, keeping watch over these, vast and often inaccessible regions.
Exactly. And with, these advanced data analytics, we can use that information to make, better decisions about water allocation, infrastructure planning, and create those early warning systems for things like floods and droughts.
Oh, wow.
So we can be more proactive and responsive to the challenges that these water towers face.
Yeah, it sounds like technology can give us the tools we need to manage these resources more effectively. What other kind of tech advancements are worth mentioning?
The development of, water efficient irrigation systems, that's another game changer. Things like drip irrigation and precision sprinkler systems, they can deliver water directly to those plant roots.
Okay.
And that minimizes waste and reduces the overall demand for water.
So it's about, making every drop count.
Yeah.
It sounds a lot more efficient than those traditional flood irrigation methods, which often waste a lot of water.
Exactly. There are even, smart irrigation systems that use sensors and weather data to optimize water delivery, ensuring that crops get just what they need when they need it.
That's incredible. But technology can only take us so far.
Yeah.
So what about the human side of things? What role do individuals play in protecting these water towers?
Well, it all starts with awareness. The more people understand the importance of water towers and the threats they face, the more likely they are to support those conservation efforts
Yeah.
and make sustainable choices in their, own lives.
So educating ourselves and spreading the word about these hidden heroes of our planet is a really crucial first step. But what about some concrete actions? What can individuals actually do to make a difference?
We can start with simple things like conserving water at home and in our gardens,
Right.
fixing leaks, taking shorter showers, choosing, those water efficient appliances. These things can make a real difference. It's about being mindful of our water footprint and recognizing that every drop counts, even in our, daily routines.
Yeah, it's about taking personal responsibility, even if we feel like we're far removed from those mountain regions. So what other actions can we take?
Supporting organizations that are working to protect those mountain ecosystems, that's another great way to get involved. Donations, volunteering, and advocating for policies that promote conservation, these things can have a real impact.
It's about, putting our money where our mouth is and supporting those on the ground, working to protect these vital resources. But beyond individual actions, what about governments and policymakers? What needs to happen at that higher level to safeguard these water towers?
I think governments need to, really recognize the importance of these mountain ecosystems and make their protection a priority in their national and international policies. It's time to move beyond just a narrow focus on economic growth and truly value these natural assets.
It's about recognizing that a healthy planet is the foundation for a healthy economy. So what specific actions can governments take?
Well, investing in, scientific research and monitoring programs is crucial. We need to understand the complex dynamics of these water towers, how they're being impacted by climate change and other pressures. Knowledge is power, and the more we understand these systems, the better equipped we are to protect them.
Yeah, research is a key piece of the puzzle, but how do we translate that knowledge into action?
Governments need to, develop and implement those integrated water management plans that take a holistic view, thinking about the needs of all the stakeholders, upstream and downstream communities, and, of course, the environment. It's about bringing everyone to the table and finding solutions that work for people and nature.
But with so many different actors and interests involved,
Yeah.
how do we make sure that these plans are actually effective?
That's where strong governance and enforcement mechanisms come in. Policies need to be clear, they need to be enforceable and accountable. There need to be ways to, monitor progress and address violations. It's about having, teeth and ensuring that those words translate into action.
Yeah, it sounds like a complex balancing act, making sure everyone's needs are met while also protecting the environment. But with so much demand for water, how do we decide who gets what? How do we, prioritize?
That's a tough question, and there are no easy answers. But I think one key principle is ensuring, equitable access to water, recognizing that everyone has that right to clean, safe water for their, basic needs. Water is a fundamental human right, and that needs to be at the forefront of any water management strategy.
Absolutely. But we also need to think about the needs of the environment, right?
Absolutely. Protecting ecosystems and making sure they get, enough water is critical for maintaining biodiversity, regulating the water cycle, and building resilience to climate change. It's about finding that balance between human needs and environmental sustainability, recognizing that both are essential for a healthy and, thriving planet.
It does sound like there's a lot of work to do, but also a lot of, promising solutions emerging.
There are, and it's important to remember this isn't just about protecting some far-off mountains. It's about safeguarding that water that sustains all of us.
This has been such an incredible journey from the science behind these water towers to the challenges and the solutions. And it's clear that the future of these mountains and the water they provide is so deeply connected to our own.
It really is. The health of those mountain ecosystems directly affects the health of, our planet and the well-being of billions of people.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. The mountains are calling, not just for, our admiration, but for our action. So what will you do to answer that call?
Stay curious, keep exploring, and join us next time for more groundbreaking research brought straight to your ears. Don't forget to subscribe and share, because science is meant to be heard.